Morning, everybody. I'm sure you've seen certain folks that have these really slick productions with PowerPoint. This won't be anything like those. I tried to think of a good place to start, and I thought that maybe this was probably the foundation for everything else that I might want to talk about this week, of what is it to be a Christian. And we're going to use this passage out of Luke 19. So Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay him back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Before we get started into the text, you have to understand what's happening here. It's really easy to miss exactly what Jesus is doing. Being a tax collector is not like we assume today. If you worked for the IRS and you went to a party, you might not tell people, "Hey, I work for the IRS." That might just be sort of a downer on everything. So it's not like that. It's more like this. Israel was an occupied country, and the Romans were smart. Rather than just subjugating a country and laying it waste and taking away all that they could, they would occupy the country and take away the country's wealth. And it happened through this system of quote-unquote taxes that was just really a euphemism for shakedown money. If you don't pay us, we're going to kill you. And so doing that, they could take 80 to 90% of a country's wealth away with them, and leave the people that were subjugated unable to form a rebellion, because they wouldn't have the money to obtain weapons anywhere, and they would be, for the most part, a starving population. So they'd never be physically strong enough to stand up to the Romans as well. So they could keep this going on indefinitely. And to do it, they would get folks of the community to be tax collectors. And it was always taken at sword point or spear point, and the idea was, you serve us by collecting the taxes, and then you can collect anything else you want, and that's yours to keep. And so they were hated. These were like Nazi collaborators, It's a little hard where our generations are getting farther and farther from the war, but to understand how horrible those people were, that during the Nazi occupation, say, of France, these were the folks who got to live well because they'd rat out their neighbors. And when the war was over, most of those people were killed by those same neighbors because of this collaboration. So that's who Zacchaeus is. They were hated, absolutely hated, ostracized from society. Nobody would associate with them. Nobody would talk to them. So what in the world could make somebody betray their family? What could make them turn on their families, their own people? Well, it's an easy answer: love of money. That money was the most important thing in their lives, and they would do anything, literally anything, to get more of it. They would rat out their neighbors, their families. They would take everything somebody had and tell, "Oh, well, this is what, it's not me. It's those Romans. They won all of this stuff." But in the meantime, the tax collectors became wildly wealthy in a time when everybody else was in complete poverty. And so they were absolutely hated, and you have to understand that, or you kind of miss what Jesus is doing here. So today we're going to talk about conversion. And you're thinking, conversion? We're going to break it up into 4 parts: the necessity of it, the circumstances of it, the key to conversion, and the sign of conversion. So you're thinking, conversion? What are you talking about? You must be joking. Who's being converted? Most of us, we're Christians here. We're churchgoers. So most of us grew up thinking along these lines. Converts, those are folks from other religions. Okay, so those are Muslims that have come to Christianity, or Buddhists, or atheists, or somebody. Or They're people whose lives are on fire. They're drug addicts or they're criminals, and they become converted and they become a good person because they found Christ and now they stop being whatever else they were. And for most folks who are in the mainline Christian churches, Christianity kind of looked like this. Go to church, try to be a good person, do your best to follow Jesus' teachings, and be nice to other people. And that was sort of how you lived out being a Christian. So salvation was a process. And there's a real problem with salvation being a process. But we'll get to that in a minute. But Jesus in this passage is saying today's salvation has come to this house. Past tense. So it's not a process, it's an event. When Nicodemus in John comes to see Jesus, he was told he had to be born again. He didn't say, you have to work it out until this sort of happens. He said, you have to have this happen to you. So it's an event. This is something we can put a point to. Born again, start over, revolutionized, converted. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity talks about it this way, and I'm going to paraphrase. It's paraphrased up there. I'm going to read a little more complete here. Jesus came not to make men nice, but to make men new. Niceness, wholesome, integrated personality is an excellent thing, but we must not suppose that even if we succeeded in making everyone nice, we should have saved their souls. A world of nice people, content in their own niceness and looking no further, turned away from God, would be just as desperately in need of salvation as a miserable world, and might be even more difficult to save. For mere improvement is not redemption. Though redemption always improves people even here and now, and will in the end improve them to a degree we can't yet imagine. But God became man to turn creatures into sons, not simply to produce better men of the old kind, but to produce a new kind of man. It's not like teaching a horse to jump better and better, but it's like turning a horse into some kind of winged creature. So the circumstances of conversion, when we think of this, we usually think of something dramatic and desperate. That's not what's happening with Zacchaeus. He wanted to see who Jesus was. He was curious. There wasn't a desperation. Well, to some degree, I guess there was. But he was just curious. So was this guy. Anybody recognize this face? Any of the old folks like me? This is C. Everett Koop. And he was the Surgeon General of the United States. This is the guy that finally had the courage to say, smoking is bad for you, and you really shouldn't do that. And to say, if you're a pregnant woman, you shouldn't smoke and you shouldn't drink because it has bad side effects. This is the guy that did this, and he was not a Christian. He worked at CHOP, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, but his wife was a Christian. And so he would go to church with her on Sunday evenings because he had rounds in the morning. And mostly it was just to make his wife happy, happy wife, happy life. And so he just decided, I'll go. And at first he thought, well, that preacher up there is mostly just nuts. But there are these little nuggets of wisdom inside of what he does. And after a while, he started thinking, well, there's more wisdom. That's getting bigger and the nuts part's getting smaller. Until finally, he was not only really listening, but his heart was being convicted. And at a certain point, he realized, a year ago, I believed none of it, and now I believe it all. Somewhere in there, I crossed a line. So he couldn't tell you a day that this is the day I became a Christian. He just knew that over this time period, it started making sense. And there he was. There's another fellow that my wife and I have been friends with for a long, long time who was on the FBI's most wanted list. He was a drug dealer, and he was deeply involved with all the crime that surrounds that. Once his front door was being beaten in by the FBI, he was leaping out the back window. And he went to hide out in the back of a church where he was known because he was trying to date the pastor's daughter. And you can imagine how that was going. But he was in the back, and the pastor finished up his message, and he was about to end the service, and he said, folks, I just feel like the Holy Spirit's telling me I have to stay because somebody's life is going to change. And so everybody just stayed put. And as time wore on, Dave realized he's talking about me. And he was sitting in the back row. He was drunk and he was high, sitting in the back row. And he said he stood up and he took a single step. And at once he was cured of alcoholism and he was no longer addicted to drugs in a single step. And Dave was radically changed, became a pastor, and for the next decade or so, every so often, FBI men would come to the church service. trying to figure out, is this real or is this guy just trying to throw us off? And now, goodness sakes, it's been 30 plus years in the ministry. He's just now hitting retirement age and has been a pastor for all this time. So there are those dramatic moments, but it's not always that way. Sometimes it's more casual as it goes in. So curious and persistent. And that's a big part of it. Coop kept going, even when he thought it was nuts. Zacchaeus climbed a tree. Now, why in the world would Zacchaeus do something so undignified? He's a wealthy guy. Well, remember, he was hated. And so when he tried to come up to the front to see where Jesus was, the crowd was not going to move. Because you're that tax collector, I ain't moving for you. You're not standing anywhere near me. I'm going to pretend you don't exist. And you know what? Being persistent is a real key to it. Because we live in the United States. And we live all over this country. And if you are any place in a metro area in this country, you will be walled out. People will make fun of you for being a Christian. People will press you to say no to it. But he was persistent enough to do something a bit embarrassing, climb a tree rather than just go home. This guy, Kenneth Clark, he was the director for the PBS series Civilizations. And in his autobiography, he relates what to me is a heartbreaking story. He says that he was in France in a cathedral and he had an experience where he knew Jesus was real. He knew it. There was no question in his mind, God is real. All of this is true. But this is what he said about it. But wonderful as it was, it caused a problem in terms of action. If I were to follow through on this, I would have to reform. I'd have to change. My family would think I was going mad. So gradually the effect wore off and I made no effort to retain it. He wasn't persistent. He was more worried about what people would think of him than he was about the reality of who Jesus is. So being desperate is not the best circumstance, I think, for being a Christian. For some, yeah, that's how it is, but it can be like this, where a drowning man will grasp anything at the moment of crisis, but as soon as it's over, they turn away because they really never have embraced Jesus. They've not fallen in love with him. So the best conditions seem to be an intellectual openness, a curiosity, and a persistence to really find the gospel. And the circumstances vary. It might be a dramatic moment like my friend Dave, or it might be something like Coop, where it just sort of happens over time. So the key to conversion, what's always there, regardless of circumstances? We can see it in verse 5 and in verse 9. Keep this in mind. Every other religion points to something you do, a path, a set of steps. Do this and you shall live. Other religions always and only, salvation is a process. Always and only. And the problem with that is this, it's never complete. But what if I forgot something? But what if I didn't confess this? But what if I didn't do this? What if I didn't pray in the right direction enough times? What if I forgot what if I was sick and it's unending. So it's never a certainty. There's never a certainty towards that. And sadly, most Christian churches have adopted this model. Go to church, try to be a good person, do your best to follow his teachings, be nice to other people. It's still a process. Tim Keller describes looking at an atheist website where they were discussing this question. Do most Christians believe that they're saved by grace or by good works? And as they talked about it, their consensus was, well, from Christians I've talked to, I think that some of them will say, I'm saved by grace, but you still have to do this and this. So I think they mostly think in terms of good works. And sadly, I think that the atheists were probably right, that most people do think that way. They really might be right. Martin Lloyd-Jones, Welsh minister, used to ask this question. This was his litmus test question. Are you willing to say that you're a Christian? And most people answered with some version of this. Well, I try, but I don't feel that I'm good enough. And this is what he says, that once I know that they have no idea of what a Christian is, they are still thinking in terms of themselves. It sounds very modest to say that you're not good enough, but it's a denial of the faith. Do you see it? It's a denial of the faith. You say, well, I just don't think I'm good enough. Of course you're not good enough. You will never be good enough. No one ever has been good enough. But Jesus is good enough, and I am in him. And that's the gospel. And in verse 5, Jesus says to Zacchaeus, I am coming. And in verse 9 he says, salvation has come to this house today. Where Jesus is present, salvation is present. And there's no other way. It doesn't matter how nice I might be. I have to be made new. So what does this mean? Well, it means you don't do a list of things. Jesus saves you by what he does. You embrace him, and you are in him. And Martin Luther understood this. He says, when I realized that, I felt myself born again and ushered into heaven. And when I realized that the law was one thing and the gospel was another, I broke through. That's what happened to C. Everett Koop. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to you if you're a Christian. Is that there's a moment where it breaks through, and it's not about what you do. It's not about, well, if I do these things, that will make me a Christian. Any more than the old saying that if I sit, to sit in a garage will turn you into a car. No, it doesn't work that way. It's something Jesus does with us first. Christianity and all other religions differ in the order of things. Jesus comes first. Lives get cleaned up. That's the gospel. Zacchaeus responds with joy. I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. Whoop. There we go. It's the order of things. It's not that because I do these things, I'm a Christian. No, it's because of what Jesus has done with me that I do these good things. That's just the living out of it. It's the same way in marriage. My wife and I have been married for 32 years as of last Thursday, and I'm exclusive to that woman. But that's not what makes me love her. It's because I love her that I'm exclusive to this woman. And that's the same way with Jesus. Jesus changes us, and in response, our lives look different. We wind up doing these good things. But the order of the world is different. It's really different. And there's a hymn that I found that really says it beautifully. "'Tis not that I did choose thee, for Lord, that could not be. This heart would still refuse thee, had thou not chosen me. My heart owns none before thee, for thy rich grace I thirst. This knowing, if I love thee, thou must have loved me first." That's it. That's the gospel. Jesus comes, and then lives get turned around. He doesn't look up in the tree and see Zacchaeus and says, you scoundrel, you cheater, you thief, go get your life cleaned up, and then we'll talk. He says, no, I'm coming right now. I'm loving you right now. I'm not loving you because you're lovable. I'm loving you because it will make you lovable. And Zacchaeus responds with joy. So gladly, he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. So why is he so joyful? What about this, I'm coming to your house? I mean, think about if somebody goes to your house, what's the first thing you need to do? Well, what's the first thing your mom makes you do? Clean it. Right? Okay. They're coming over. They're going to be here in 5 minutes. Clean everything. No chance for Zacchaeus. However you've been living, buddy, Jesus is about to see it. I'm coming to your house right now. And Zacchaeus is overjoyed. If any of us right now, somebody said, Jesus is coming to your house in the next 5 minutes, you'd be thinking, oh, I should have picked up that pair of underwear that's on the middle of the floor. That's how we would live. Some of you guys in the dorm rooms, take note. But Zacchaeus is joyful because he knew it was costing Jesus something. His reputation. Now, all the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. He's going with that guy? I would throw my clothes away if that guy touched me. He's going to his house? He knew it was costing him his reputation. But here's the deal. If Zacchaeus was revolutionized because Jesus paid with his reputation, how much more should we be revolutionized to know that Jesus paid for us with his life? It's deep waters, guys. It's deep waters. So what's the sign of conversion? Well, Zacchaeus says something in verse 8 that shows that he's been changed. And in response to what he says in verse 8, Jesus says, salvation has come to this house. So something happens there that lets Jesus see this man is changed. Let's take a look at it. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount. One of the things I love about this is the excitement in it. Look, Lord. He doesn't stand up and say, okay, Lord, here's what I'll do. I'll do this and I'll do that. He's like, looky, Dad. Look, Daddy, look what I'm going to do for you. There's an excitement. There's a connection there that has not been there before. Zacchaeus has a changed attitude toward what he treasures. He's a tax collector who loves money more than anything. And now check it out. From greedy to generous. The law required 10% to be given to the poor. He says, I'm giving 50%. The law required anything you cheated somebody out of, you had to pay restitution, so give them back their money, plus 20%. So 120% in all. He offers 400%. So this is not somebody saying, well, what do I have to do? What do I have to give? He's saying, what can I give? Let me give back everything. And think about it. He's been a tax collector for long enough to become the chief tax collector and to become wealthy. So when it comes down to if I've cheated anybody out of anything, that's pretty much everyone in the community. By the time he's done, he's going to be at least as poor, maybe more poor, than the people that he's been cheating for years. Because the money means nothing now. You know? It's kind of like those sort of end of the world movies that they make where there's some guy and he's got a bunch of cash and the other guy's got water. You know, I'll give you this for it. And he says, well, what am I going to do with that? That's worthless. That's Zacchaeus at this moment. All this money that I've craved for my whole life that led me to despise my family, my people, and to live like this, I don't even care about it. Let me just give it away in epic amounts. It's not a matter of what do I have to do, it's what can I give. So what is it to be a Christian? To be converted, to be radically changed. To have the values of your heart altered by the presence of Jesus in your life. To truly understand what Jesus has done for us changes everything about who we are, what we value, and how we live. If in the course of this very hurried, I'm sorry, I'm going 100 miles an hour. Mostly these sermons that I do take place over about 45 minutes to an hour. And so each day I'm going to be booking it through there, and I'm really sorry. But if there's something that in today you found yourself of saying, I've been in the process. Go to church, try to be good, read my Bible, do this, do that. You found yourself. There are staff members and campers all around here who would love to talk to you. You can come talk to me. And if you're thinking, I don't know who you are, I get it. But there's folks here who can talk to you. So that by the end of this, you can stand with Zacchaeus and say, look, Lord, I'm new. I'm different. My life has changed. Would you guys pray with me, please? Father, we rejoice in what you have done for us through Jesus Christ. We are so excited, Lord, to belong to you, to have been called out of the mass of the human race to bear your name. And Father, I pray that if there's somebody here who's not been sure, who's wondered, am I really a Christian? Let them know. It's not about what they do. It's about what you have done. And for those who are sure, Father, give them courage to live in a manner worthy of the calling we've received. In Jesus' name, amen.